Welcome to session 4 of Mind Games. In this session, we are going to tackle another one of those toxic thought categories, insecure talk. These are the thoughts that lead to self-doubt. Now, extinguishing self-doubt has a lot to do with rekindling your courage. Every time I think about courage, I think of two things. First, I think of the lion in The Wizard of Oz. Now that song is going to be stuck in my head, and maybe yours too. If I only had the courage. But then I think about teaching my kids about what courage actually means, what the lion ended up learning. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's moving forward in spite of it. Many of us, we fail to move forward simply because we think we can't. Our fear stops us in our tracks. It keeps us from doing what we've probably had the power or the ability to do all along. Now, the most common way that people give up, Alice Walker says, the most common way that they give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any. Now, I'm not afraid of too many things, I think, but fear of failure, yeah, absolutely, 100%. We did this thing once as staff where we had to rate ourselves for various questions. And one was for fear of failure. Another was being adverse to risk and other things along those lines. And everyone that had to do something like that had to do with failing, I rated myself very highly on. I have learned that I don't even like to-do lists because if I don't complete something on the list, I feel like I failed. I had to do some searching to really realize that it was because I'm an optimist and I think that it takes less time to do something than it actually does. And that's a whole nother issue. But once I got to the issue, I was able to look at to-do lists a little bit differently. But for those of you who maybe are like me, also afraid to fail, how do you actually stop being afraid of failing? Well, Les in the book Bad Thoughts says you don't. You don't stop being afraid. You simply get better at being afraid. You learn that failing is actually just feedback. You learn that failure isn't fatal. We learn when we fail. I don't know if there's any card players in here. I know with some church crowds, maybe not, but my dad and his friends used to play penny ante poker. So the stakes weren't very high, but they taught me when I was pretty young how to do some basic poker games, and I caught on pretty quickly. But I had to be very self-aware and realize that I was no good at bluffing. I did not have a poker face. So when they tried to call my bluff, I was actually in pretty good shape because the truth was I had a good hand. Here's the deal. Fear is always bigger in your head. Fear makes you think falsely about something going on, so you think that it's not possible, just like the guys didn't think that I actually had a good hand. But fear, just like that thought, is a liar. Courage is actually a way to call fear's bluff. And once you stare it down, it shrinks. You find out the reality of the situation and that the truth isn't as bad as you thought. Well, that is courage. But we've all been there before, right? We've been in a place where we're feeling the weight of self-doubt or fearing failure, and it can feel like we're stuck. It can feel like we're unable to move forward, as if something beyond our control is actually holding us back. Interestingly, this sense of powerlessness has been studied in a landmark experience from the 1970s. It shines a light on why some of us actually give up, while others maybe push through and find the courage to keep going. Martin Seligman observed an experiment that set him on a quest to unravel why some people lose courage and play it safe and give up, while others might look for solutions, take risks, overcome obstacles, and achieve results. For the experiment, researchers taught dogs to associate a tone with a very mild shock, the kind that you might get from touching a doorknob on a wintry day. The German Shepherds were harnessed and then repeatedly exposed to the sound, followed by the mild shock. Now, thankfully, we don't do things like this today. But Seligman concluded that many of these dogs had learned to be helpless. In the early conditioning, they had received a mild shock no matter how much they barked or jumped or struggled. They learned that nothing they did actually mattered. So why try if you feel like you can't win? We all respond in a helpless manner on occasion because our experiences have taught us that we are not as capable, not as powerful as we thought we were. And at some point, in our attempts to achieve our goals, to fulfill dreams, or to overcome hardships and obstacles, we were thwarted. As a result, our confidence was shaken and our faith became fractured, and we put the adventure of our life on hold. Now, a recent survey of more than 2,000 adults found that 60% of us experience self critical thoughts on a weekly basis. But there's a way out of that trap. We intend for this session to help be a pivot point in your life and help you put an end to your second guessing. You need to have faith in yourself, Roy T. Bennett says, to be brave and take risks. You don't have to have it all figured out to move forward. Hopefully, this session will help you out with moving forward and being brave, even if you don't have it all figured out. So, what does self-doubt sound like? Well, father and daughter psychologists, doctors Robert and Lisa Firestone, evaluated people's critical inner voices, and they found out that the most common self-critical thought people hear in their heads is that they are different. Now, it's not different in a positive sense, but in a negative, alienating way. They feel like they are alone in being insecure. So the self-doubter's inner critic is prone to self-statements that lead to feeling inadequacy and to feed that sense of helplessness. Namely, it comes down to two toxic thoughts that continually bounce around in our brains and the brains of all of us who struggle with self-doubt. These two thoughts are, I'm not good enough, and I can't change anything. These statements, while they may feel true in the moment, they actually instill a fear of failure, and they dismantle your courage. They take away that courage because it gives you that sense of failure, that I'm not good enough, and I can't change anything. They're dead set on shaking your confidence. Add to that our compulsion to compare ourselves to others, and it's little wonder why so many of us experience self-doubt. It might sound a little something like this. You might think, I'm not smart enough to go to college. I could never get a promotion. Nobody would want to date me. I'll never be able to move to another city. Nobody wants to hear what I have to say. This is often me. I'm going to fail at my job. I'll never realize my dream. The list of self-sabotaging, the inner dialogue that happens, it can go on and on and on. But psychologists, they call this cognitive distortion catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is what happens whenever we assume the worst about our current situation or imagine immediate failure for a future situation. That is what catastrophizing means. Now, what's troubling is that it doesn't just stop at that. It goes on to sound something like this. If I fail this test, I will never pass this class and I will never graduate and I'll just be a total failure. Or maybe something like this. If I don't recover quickly from this procedure, then I'll never get better and I'll be disabled for the rest of my life. Or if my boyfriend breaks up with me, I'll never find anyone else and I'll never be happy again. Here's the deal. Self-doubt can sound and end up being harmful in a number of ways. But the most harmful effect of chronic self-doubt is cowardice. And cowardice, we know, is deeply rooted in fear. Considering how many scriptures there are that tell us not to fear in one way or another, it should clue us into the fact that fear is not how God wanted or intended for us to live. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, For the Spirit of God does not make us timid. He doesn't give us a spirit of fear. In some translations, it might say, but it gives us power and love and self-discipline, a sound mind. Joshua 1:9 says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." Isaiah 41:10 says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Don't be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." See, there are so many scriptures, and I think they say one scripture on fear for every day of the year. But Max Lucado, he writes this. He says, fear doesn't want you to make the journey to the mountain. If he can rattle you enough, fear will persuade you to take your eyes off the peaks and settle for a dull existence in the flatlands. We said week 1 that we have an enemy, and he doesn't want you to win the ground in the battlefield of your mind. And God, his plan is not for you to have fear, but self-doubt often steals your courage. Courage for our purposes is about living life to the fullest, the life that Jesus came to give us, as John 10:10 says, right? That Jesus came to give us a rich and satisfying life, a life that you can live to the full. It's about transcending learned helplessness and living a fulfilling life powered by passion. Wise King Solomon actually spent years of his life searching for passion. In Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 10, Solomon writes, "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for in the realm of the dead where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom." Now, a lot of people read that and they think that Solomon's saying, like, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you might die. But that's not at all what he's saying. He's saying, throw your whole heart into whatever you do. Live while you have the chance. It's similar to what Nadine Stair said in a famous interview when asked at age 85 what she would do if she had her life to do over again. She said, "I dare to make more mistakes. I would relax. I would be sillier. I would take fewer things seriously. I would perhaps have more actual troubles and fewer imaginary ones. You see, I'm one of those people who lived seriously and sanely, hour after hour, day after day. If I had to do it over again," she said, "I would take more chances. I would climb more mountains, and I would swim more rivers. If I had to do it over again, I would travel lighter than I have. If I had my life to live over, I would start barefoot earlier in the spring and stay that way later in the fall. I would go to more dances, I would ride more merry-go-rounds, and I would greet more people." You see, too many of us, too many of our dreams, they lay dormant because of too much caution. We take things so seriously and cautiously that we don't actually do the things that we possibly dream of doing or want to do. Johann von Schiller says, "He that is over-cautious will accomplish but very little." You see, when we live too guardedly, we lose our passion, and then we lose our confidence. Without courage, we live encumbered without too much restraint, never venturing out beyond the emotional security of our self-imposed comfort zone. So here's what this means. On a typical day, we spend just over 17% of our time in activities that we find enjoyable and meaningful. 17%. That's only 25 minutes per day doing what we love. The vast majority of us spend nearly 20% of every day on unsatisfying activities. And the rest of our time is spent somewhere in the middle of that, facing just whatever the day holds. Sometimes those constraints are imposed on us by our social and economic standards, and sometimes they're self-imposed. Why? Because we've listened too long to our sabotaging self-talk, and we find ourselves playing it safe. Norman Cousins fervently believed that the tragedy of life is in what dies inside a man while he lives. I'll never forget being at a leadership conference and hearing somebody saying how graveyards were probably full of unrealized dreams, of nonprofits that weren't created, of cures for diseases. Because far too many of us, we don't so much as live as merely exist. Whether our circumstances are privileged or painful, we have to find ways of taking risks that reignite our passion for living. I find this so true to be in my own life, even in a role that and a calling that I absolutely love. Recently, I'd found myself reinvigorated in part of that with a new outreach initiative that we'll share with our church soon enough. But when it came up, it was first just a random conversation in a back room, kind of joking around, and I wasn't so sure about it because my fear of failure and adversity to risk, right? But the more I thought about it, the more that risk actually reignited my passion for what I not just get to do, but what I wanted to do. It was a bit out of my comfort zone, but with the right people around the table, I am so ecstatic. But before that, I kind of felt like I was just going in circles, doing the same thing over and over again, spinning my wheels a little bit. Have you ever felt that way? Like you're just spinning your wheels, you're doing the things, just letting life happen, you're existing, and you circle back around to do it all over again the next day? Sometimes we even think that's all there is. And there's something to that. Did you know that without landmarks to guide us, we will literally end up walking in circles? A German scientist named Jan Suman proved this when he took a group of subjects to an empty parking lot and open fields. He blindfolded them and instructed them to walk in a straight line. Now, some of them managed to keep the straight course for about 10 or 20 steps. A few lasted 50 or 100. But in the end, all of them wound up circling back to their points of origin. Not many of them, not most of them, but every last one. The same is true when it comes to our thoughts. If we are not intentional, if we do not raise our level of self-awareness, we will circle back to believing our toxic thoughts over and over again. So, what do we do to overcome this? To overcome self-doubt and to find more courage? Well, your insecurity and your self-doubt are extinguished the moment that you stop listening to your inner critic. Why is that? Well, that's because when you stop believing I'm not good enough, then you start believing that you are. That's when you stop believing I can't change anything, you start believing that you can. So here's something very practical and simple that you can do to help with this. And it's going to feel a little silly, but trust me on this. First, give your inner critic a name. You know, that voice that just comes up often and tells you you're not good enough or tells you you can't change anything. That inner critic that gives those thoughts to you, give it a name. Because when you name your inner critic, you actually externalize the accusing voice. It's going to give you the ability to help you see your inner critic as something separate from you. So just humor me. You could name him Gordon or her Star. I go with Star because I think stars are just perfect. And anyway, so the next thing you're going to do is give your healthy internal voice a name. Because just as toxic thoughts dismantle confidence, healthy giving thoughts build it back up. So I would go with Angel. Maybe you go with Chaplain. I choose Angel because it reminds me of the spiritual component that I want to think about when I think about the voice, that healthy internal voice that's guiding me, the Holy Spirit. So psychologists, they actually use this, and they give this naming exercise. It's a way to, they say, to process known, it's a process known as stress inoculation. So psychologists actually use this. It's a proven method known as stress inoculation. It's proven to help retrain the brain to make little self-statements that alter the unhealthy patterns of thinking. So, just as giving a small dose of like a virus can help protect patients against a disease like tetanus or measles, for example, the small doses of self-talk can inoculate us against our inner critic. So we really want you to do this. All right. And once you've named your inner critic and your healthy internal voice, zero in on the critical thought that's actually causing you the most self doubt. Once you've done that, here's what happens. Each time you hear this inner critic speak up, I want you to actually invite your rational voice, that healthy voice, into the dialogue with these three questions. First, is it true? Ask yourself, is this statement actually true? Then ask, are you overreacting? And the third is it helpful? If you want to extinguish self doubt and bolster your confidence, get to naming your inner critic and identifying its most toxic statements. I think you'll be happily surprised with how effective this can be. Now, that is really great to get you started, and I want you to do this, but I have a bit more for you. We're going to get real practical about extinguishing self doubt and get you out of that rut. In this next exercise, I want you to actually do this at home. All right, so you can get a piece of paper, a blank sheet, whatever it looks like, and you are going to draw 3 concentric circles, kind of like a bullseye on a blank sheet of paper. All right, and this is what we are going to do because it's going to help. All right, so the innermost circle, it's going to represent your comfort zone. Okay, comfort zone. All right, so these things, you're going to write down some of the things that can be in that most inner circle. These are the things that you feel safe with, the things that don't cause you too much anxiety to do, those places that feel safe in your life. This could be like coming to church, just coming to church and attending. It could look like gardening. Maybe you enjoy gardening. I know in the winter there's not much of that, but maybe it could be going to the gym or anything like that. It could be things that that maybe could be improved upon, but not anything too crazy or too big. Now, around that inner circle, you're going to do another circle, and this is actually going to be things that you can improve a little bit that represent some kind of growth in your life. This could be like leading or hosting a small group. Okay? That requires a little bit more than just coming to church and doing that kind of thing. But it could also mean like signing up to volunteer at your church. Could be like changing your career or starting a podcast. Anything that gets you just one step outside of your comfort zone to the next thing in your life. Now, the last ring, this one represents those big fears that you have. It represents the things that are a little bit wild, a little bit crazy, the things that you're a little afraid of stepping out and doing your dreams. Your dreams are the things that nearly scare you to death. Maybe makes your heart race a little bit. This could be something like write a book. Could be something to do with starting a nonprofit. Could be a promotion of some kind. A political campaign, never know. Could be learning a new language. Or maybe it's even something like move to another country. These are the things that are hard for you to even think about. The things that maybe scare you, that are very hard to take a step or an action on. This personalized kind of chart here can help you, though, in stepping beyond your comfort zone and cultivating courage. A mountain of research actually shows us that When we set goals and make plans and find more passion for living, it increases our self-confidence. Taking a small step outside of your comfort zone, you're going to see it. You're going to see this happen. That one small step into the next area, the next thing, is going to help you reignite that passion, reignite your passion for living. It's like Vincent van Gogh says. He says, if you hear a voice within you that says you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced. Being bold can seem really scary, I know, because it leads us into the unknown. It requires a willingness to risk change, and almost everyone fears change. But that fear is deeply rooted in our brain psychology. And that's why before we leave this session, we've got to make this important point. Being courageous does not require a leap of faith. It only asks that you take the first step, just one step. You see, when I started in ministry, I didn't have a clue that I would end up where I am now. I thought I didn't want to ever teach or preach to adults. It's kind of funny how God works. And looking back, I know that it wasn't that I didn't want to do those things. I just didn't think I was good enough. But I knew when the opportunity presented itself that I could not wait any longer, that it was a step I needed to take. And that wasn't actually my first step. Volunteering was. The conditions, though, at the time were far from perfect. I was living in Huntington, over an hour away. I had a junky car. I worked late, but I did it. And then when I knew it was time to step into ministry, I had asked people to pray. And I got back a couple of responses that said, well, we don't believe that females should do what you're doing, that they should be pastors. Here's the deal. We often want to wait for someday, when the conditions are perfect or when everybody agrees with us, but every long journey starts with a single step. I know it's cliche, but it's true. Every journey starts with a single step. Now, inertia is something that it's an inherent property of matter that resists change in its state of motion, velocity or direction, all right? But inertia is the enemy of courage. And the only cure for that inertia is to take a small step now. Martin Luther King Jr. promoted the idea of taking a step, even if you couldn't see the whole stairway when you start. What if I hadn't said yes to volunteering? What if I hadn't had allowed that person's disagreement to stop me? Well, I wouldn't be here teaching you now. What does that first step look like for you? And what is keeping you from taking it? We pray that you won't lie helpless like the dogs in the shuttle box of Martin Seligman's experiment. One small step was all that it would have required for those dogs to find freedom. Dr. Seligman actually wrote in his first paper on this phenomenon of learned helplessness shortly after he earned his PhD in 1967. And he spent the rest of his life exploring it. He says it still amazes him that when exposed to an obstacle or a challenge, some people react just like the majority of the dogs in his laboratory. Some people give in to helplessness, fearing that they don't have what it takes to succeed. They resign themselves to their challenges and put off their dreams, whether big or small. Others show a bold, unflinching determination to find a way through tough times. Their commitment actually inflames their passion, and their passion moves them towards their dreams. The difference between these two categories of people is courage enough to see themselves as capable and taking that first step. All it requires to find freedom from self-doubt is courage enough to see yourself as capable and take the first step. Will you have the courage to see yourself through your irrationally healthy voice and take that first step towards freedom? Moving from your comfort zone to your dreams is simpler than you actually think when you take one small step at a time. When you do, you will find courage and you will find a happier, healthier you on the other side of your fear. So go ahead and take that first step.